be unto you. Why, well, we believe in peace. And like the most peaceful of all teachers, Jesus did not speak an English language. If he were amongst you, he would also greet you in peace. And so like him, we greet you in peace. And we ask that you open your minds to wonderful conversation that we will have tonight. And yeah, I think that's all we need to cover. So I will turn it over to my brother Donovan X. Please give it up for him.
How y'all doing today? My name is Donovan X, in the Nation of Islam, in the Greek words of peace, Assalamu alaikum. We have the panel set. In each chair, you should see a sign with a QR code on. If you can scan it and sign in for us, please. We have our panel already seated. Once y'all get signed in, my brother Eugene Collins will be up. He'll take it from here.
Hey, how you doing today? That's Eugene Collins. I'm going to moderate your panel today. And before we get going, I'm going to introduce you to everybody that's sitting around this table. Y'all should know them as familiar faces, but I'm going to make sure we get everybody introduced here. I'm going to start to my right here with the Deputy Chief of Baton Rouge Police Department, Mr. Mike Daniels. And next up, we have our captain from the Mosque of the 65 from the Nation of Islam, Mr. Captain, or Brother Captain, Rashad Ali Muhammad. And sitting next to him from the Baton Rouge Street Team, this man dedicates all of his time, been on the streets and reducing violence, Mr. Michael Dry. And sitting next to him is the former police chief of the Baton Rouge Police Department, former Chief Murphy Paul. And Donovan and the DRX are introduced themselves. So I'm going to go beside him is sitting next to us, District 6 Council person, Mr. Cleve Dunn. Sitting next to him is Sister Gabrielle Mom. As we just said, I'm going to go ahead and jump this thing off. I know we all got stuff to do and places to be, and I promise you, we will not hold you long, and we got some chicken on the way, and I know y'all want to get to that. So we will not hold you long, I assure you. So I'm going to jump right into the panel, and I'm going to ask the first question. I'm going to plump this first question to Brother Donovan, and it says, what are the root causes of violent crime in Baton Rouge, and why do they hit black and brown communities the hardest?
I believe the root causes of the issues that we're having in the city right now is a lot of misunderstandings with the youth, and that's what we're here for today. We're trying to take our youth back from the streets, and a lot of the beef and things that we're dealing with that start with the parents. We have to do a better job at monitoring our kids and making sure that they're guided in the right direction.
Thank you, Brother. And next up, I'm going to go to Sister Gabby, but before we jump into the question, I'm going to read it for you again, Sister Gabby. I wanted to touch on, you have to pass that back down to it. I want you to touch on what the Nation of Islam is, do what we're about, explain to the folks that may not know if this is their first time engaging with the nation. Who are we?
Okay, well, the Nation of Islam, and what I mentioned is the resurrection of a mentally dead black woman and mad woman in the wilderness of North America. We've been around in America for almost 100 years at this point. We've been around since the 1930s. We were founded in Detroit by Master Prophet Muhammad, who we believe is God in person. And so, really our mission is just to teach the knowledge of self to our people so that we can become civilized and be accepted and reclaim our place in the world and be respected for who we are.
Thank you, Sister Gary. So I'm going to get you to touch on this question too. What are the root causes of violent crime in Baton Rouge, and why do they hit black and brown communities hard?
Well, I think the root causes of violence in Baton Rouge is probably the same root causes of violence everywhere else, which is mindset. And so really it comes from a lack of knowledge of self. And so when people don't understand who they are and what their purpose is, it creates this vicious cycle of, frustration, which manifests itself in violence against ourselves and against others. And so when we understand that we're reflections of God, and that when we look at a black man, when we look at a brown man, when we're looking at the reflections of God, we'll start to treat each other appropriately.
Thank you. The next up, we're going to go to Councilman Dunn. I'm going to read that question for you again, Councilman. It says, what are the root causes of violent crime in Baton Rouge, and why do they hit black and brown communities the hardest? And Councilman Dunn, I want to ask that you speak to this as a council person, some problems that you might see in your district.
Let me first thank Muhammad Ma 65 for hosting this forum. Thank you, Brother Collins, for your efforts, in advocacy and bringing us all together. But I also want to thank the community for coming out. These issues, whether violent crime or anything else, it takes more than an elected official, it takes more than a stakeholder, it takes the community actively involved in solving these things. We have to take a holistic approach, and that takes all of us doing it. To the question, Eugene, in my opinion, I think the obvious answer is maybe poverty, what area of town you live in, the lack of access to different things like education, quality education, lack of access to jobs, resources, all of these obvious answers I think we all in this room would say. But there's an underlying piece of this as well. How do we get here as a people? You asked specifically about black and brown communities. We know that we were kidnapped from our homeland in Africa and brought here to be lost from our history, from our culture, from our identity. So it's very intentional to put us in certain areas of town through the red line and things of that nature. It's intentional to keep us away from quality jobs and education. So it's really offensive when the broader community asks why we have certain crime or violent crimes or acts of crime in our community when we know, maybe not the people in power right now today, but definitely years ago, it was very intentional to put us in certain conditions, and you're seeing the play out of us being in those conditions. Now, like anything, when you know better, you do better. Most of the times, you don't know what you don't know. And until organizations like yours and others, folks find Christ or find whatever religion they believe in, can teach them a better way. So it's incumbent upon us to do better. But oftentimes we don't know better, so we don't do better. It's about awareness, it's about access, and it's about folks enlightening us to change the whole pattern.
Thank you, Councilman. Now, I'm going to go on this side here. Before we started with the two parents that just walked in, Attorney Ryan Thompson to my right here. You want to stand up and let folks see you, Attorney Ryan Thompson. And community advocate, community servant, and all the above. Ms. Dana, DC First Lady, Winbush is in the house. But I'm going to go to Chief Paul next with this question. And Chief Paul, I remember the interview you did when you basically broke down the root causes of crime. And I'm going to ask you this question. What are the root causes of violent crime in Baton Rouge, and why do they hit black and brown communities the hardest?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I feel good, kind of feel like I'm home again. It's balanced so much. Yes, sir. Look, crime is a socioeconomic issue. Specifically when it comes to the city of Baton Rouge, there's been systemic issues that have been, unfortunately, the fabric of this community for years. And those systemic issues have negatively impacted communities of color. I agree with all accounts. We talk about self-love, understanding myself, and how that plays in the crime, the community responsibility. But I like to just highlight two, and that's education. We see the lack thereof of a good education, and I support education here for years, that I believe also plays a role in that. and something that we, as a community, as a whole, don't talk about enough, and that's mental health. And the stigma that's associated with mental health in our communities, because we don't create these environments where we feel safe to say at any time out and go out there and get the help that we need. So I see that specifically. There were 3 significant periods in the city of Baton Rouge when we saw significant increases in violent crime. Okay, three times. That was in 2007. That was 2006. I'm sorry, 2006. That was again 2017, and again in 2020, 2021. So there's a median on homicides that happened in our city. And then we saw these large spikes that we had not seen before. And those 3 incidents, I want y'all to think about what happened. There we go. 05 Hurricane Katrina, the Great Flood in 16, and then COVID. So all of the significant increases in homicides in our city, there was a significant emotional event that preceded that large increase in homicide, where trends changed, things changed, and we interrupted our normalcy. And what I saw from my experience as chief, that emotions in our community changed in those periods, particularly during COVID. We saw fear, anxiety, anger, confusion. And the appropriate response to those emotions are resources, reassurance, and resolve. Even more important today, because many of the systems that were put in place that are designed to reduce crime, we're starting to see those systems become defunded. And we have to understand the importance of community and bringing the village back to the Black community if we want to see crime decrease.
Thank you. So I'm gonna put that same question to Deputy Chief Mike Daniels, from the Baton Rouge Police Department perspective. I know Chief Paul will speak on that as well, but or former Chief Paul, I want to confuse you about it. Deputy Chief, what's your thoughts on that particular question?
I might actually be louder without a microphone, but just as what was said, look, this is a huge systemic issue. And this is the thing we have to always remember. This didn't start yesterday. This has been going on for decades now. And it's been very strategic on some of our folks' behalf. So I want you to remember something. All those things that we talked about that play and create an avenue for crime, not only is it systemic, we have to be very careful on what we are presenting out here. What I mean by that, I had a couple people ask me today, was I going to bring statistics and all those things? I said no. Because I'm going to tell you, statistics can say what you want them to say. All right? So I'm not a fan of statistics. All right? Statistics are great. You should look for facts, but look for the truth. And I'm going to tell you the issues that we have from law enforcement perspective. We only treat symptoms. We never get to the root cause. We can only treat symptoms. That's why we have to attack this from a community perspective. So keep those things in mind while we're going through it. One of the things I can tell you that you're going to see, systemically, you're going to see an over-policing in certain demographics, and those are going to be those brown and Black communities. And this is the scariest part. The statistics justify it. It's not that that's the only place where crime is happening, but statistics do justify it. So we have to be very careful on how we use those things and what we do and how we respond to this epidemic, because that's what it is, and it's been going on for far too long in our community.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. go to this side. I'm going to come to you, Mr. Landis. But before I do that, I want to introduce a few folks that sit in the room. We have a young brother, not young, I think he's older than me. But a brother, Teddy Langley, is seeking office of state representative. Can you please have a seat in District 67? Yeah, Pastor Bill Flowers that just entered the room and walking. And then Mr. Trey Godfrey, who's the executive director of the Baton Rouge Area Chamber. So, ladies, kicking it to you, what are the root causes of crime in the Black and brown community in Baton Rouge? And I know the youth get a lot of blame for this, and you're a school board member. We want to hear from your perspective.
First and foremost, I want to thank everyone for allowing me to be here. Amazing topic. I want you to know that I will be very frank. Everything I say is going to be rooted in fact. It's going to be rooted in court cases. You can't talk about the perpetuation of crime if you don't follow the lineage where it started from. You can't tell me that you got too many guns in your streets when you have perpetuation of it happening right downtown at the state capitol. Just last year, we passed several crime bills. Of these crime bills, we said we're going to put guns in the hands of 18-year-olds. What's up? Follow me. Guns in the hands of 18-year-olds who have no training and who are dealing with these issues every day. Now, if you got a gun problem, who would perpetuate a situation and put more guns on the streets inside the communities that are already underserved, that are already overlooked, and are already over-policed? Now, you can't put everything on the cops because you're doing your job. But nobody's speaking about that, nobody's talking about it, but let me show you what it's done. Since those crime bills came out, this year now we're saying we want to charge 16-year-olds as adults if you get caught for a violent crime. Let me tell you how simple a violent crime can be. If you have a fight, that's considered a battery. That's not a violent crime. You go to jail, you're doing 80% of that time, you're not coming home. Perpetuation of policies is happening, not in the hands of people that look like you and I, but people who really don't care. And these same people say that they're rooted in Christ and they're rooted in the church. That ain't the Christ that I know, that ain't the church that I call. But we got to be very clear about that. Just this year, since we passed those crime bills, since we put guns in the hands of those who shouldn't have them, we found more guns inside of schools than we ever have before, not just EVO, but across the state. But let me break it down for you. In the first month of school, we found 11 guns brought inside the classrooms, or that made it across the campuses. That ain't a problem, I don't know what we're talking about today. Just in January, we found 5 more guns. If you think this is not a serious issue, I'm telling you, we don't know what we're dealing with right now. And the way that you fix this is that you have to fight policy. And you can't fight it with mere words anymore. It's not enough of us to just simply come up in here and talk about this. You have to show up, you have to call folks, and let me tell you, you got to call some folks out. Some people just can't be in office anymore, because if you're not doing what you're supposed to do in order to stop this problem, you are part of the problem. And I don't care if you look like me. I don't care if you live next door to me. You got to agitate, and you got to aggravate. That's the only way you're going to fix the problem that we're dealing with right now. You got to show up every single day as if you care. And Lord, forgive me for saying this, you got to fight like you give a damn. Because of those kids, if we're not fighting for them, they have no future. They fight each other because they don't see a future in what we are presenting to them. And every day what they see inside their community is the same thing they've been seeing, the same thing that we saw. I sit next to these folks right here because they helped raise me. It's not an impoverished community known as Glenos. Glenos wasn't bad just when I got there. Circle K Strip had a name for a reason. In fact, Circle K got shut down because they got robbed and somebody got shot and killed. But what's been the change? Nothing. Everything you see happening around us is perpetuated. It's perpetuated policy, it's perpetuated acts, and it's perpetuated failure because we failed to do our part. You want to talk about root crime? Let's talk about how we stop it. Let's talk about how we prevent it. And we're not having that conversation, again, I don't know what we're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Lance. I'm going to jump this question to you, Brother Darrell Muhammad. What are the root causes of crime in Baton Rouge, and why do they hit Black and brown communities the hardest? And I know you've been in the streets doing work for a long time. From your perspective, what's the problem?
First of all, in the name of a lot of years, the first one, the bear witness that there's no God but one God. And regardless of what you call him, whether it be Yahweh, Allah, Elohim, it doesn't matter. We all are one people under one God. The thing I want to say is that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said years ago that one of the greatest handicaps we have is that there is no love for self. And he said that no love for self was the root cause, right, of stool pigeons. It was the root cause of quarreling, disunity, fights, that a lack of love for self. So there are members of the clergy here. And there are people, church folk here. I grew up, of course, as a Baptist. The thing we have to do most of all, I'm talking about with one voice, is preach and teach that black people should love themselves. Love everybody is not going to cut it. You understand? When I spray my arm, I have to put the antibiotic on my actual arm where the scar is. Our problem is not our lack of love for white folks. We loving them just fine, right? And understand the problem is our lack of love for one another. So that has to be preached from every pulpit. And just because I'm for me doesn't mean I'm against you. But we have to preach black self-love. Number one, if I take care of my child, that doesn't mean I'm against your child. But we as a people have to make black folks have to become the priority to black folks, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Shouldn't black folks be the priority of black folks? That doesn't mean we hate someone else. That doesn't mean we're against an Asian. But we have to become the priority of one another. And when you look at the things that pass, you go online and I actually stopped going online to check and see who voted, how they voted, because I was so disappointed. A lot of times we're not conscious enough to know from a cause and effect standpoint what's good for us and what's good for our people. There's a whole task force that has been meeting to build a $500 million prison, but there has not been a task force, to deal with the opportunity that these young people need to have. We are meeting all the time with white architectural firms to decide what kind of jail we want. But we're not meeting to decide what kind of community that we want our children to be. All right? So we must love one another. And this lack of love, according to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, according to Malcolm X, according to the Honorable Louis Farrakhan, the lack of love for self is the root cause of everything that we do bad to one another. And thank you.
Thank you. And Attorney Thompson, I know you are one of the attorneys on the panel. I want to ask you a little follow-up to something that Lane's mentioned. Lane's mentioned the change in the laws that's maybe driving some of the guns that they see in school. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So, can you be more specific? That's broad. I want to make sure that I narrow in on the question and the answer.
So, I think it was because specifically, right? Well, Governor Lane kind of lowered the age where young people could have weapons, right? And as well as you remove the ability to have a license to carry concealed. What Mr. Lane is speaking to is some of those more lax gun laws that led to more people probably having guns, especially younger people.
So, I think, I guess it's a two-part answer to that question. Like, as an attorney, there's always, like, in Brother Lance, we're always writing a background section. Right? So when we respond to things, there's usually a background section and a procedural question to the answer before we get to the conclusion, right? And so when we're talking about the background, you're referencing the Second Amendment. This country has never had a problem with white folks having guns. Never. But there's always been a problem with Negroes having guns. There's a book called Negroes with Guns. There's a recent movie that just came out called Sinners. In India, there were individuals smoking stack, right, who were recent veterans who had just returned and were advocates of the gun. If we're talking about Boogaloosa, we know they were advocates of the gun. So I want to make it very clear that the gun is not the problem. I'm going to repeat that. The gun is not the problem. It is the individual that is behind the gun that is the problem. So when we're talking about the laws to open up the Second Amendment right, I don't necessarily have an issue with that. What I have an issue with is inequalities and equities, right? So if we're talking about these communities that have access to guns, then we must have the conversation about what causes the person behind the gun to then pull the trigger, to break the law. And so I want to answer that point about the laws, going to the law portion of that. Back in the 1800s, there was a person who visited from Britain who gave an assessment of America. And in that assessment, what he said was that the Negro class at one point will rebel. And the rebellion won't be equality, it'll be inequality. And the response to that, right, was to put arms in the hands of groups. What do I mean by that? We have this notion that individuals who were non-planter class were not criminals, did not commit crime, were not vagrants, were not peasants. That is untrue. The response that the government had to that class was governmental intervention. What do I mean by that? On the way out, President Obama gave a talk on race and class. And what he said was that I had an issue with white men not having an issue with their granddaddy getting government subsidies, with their daddy getting government subsidies, with their grandmother getting low subsidies, home education, GI Bill, all of those things. But when it's African Americans trying to get those things, we now want to defund. And so if we're talking about addressing the issue of those laws and those crimes and the root causes of them, what we have never gotten is our 48 years of community. When you go around and you look at these government offices, you find some black women, but you never see black men. You never see them fully employed. Go to the 19JDC. Go to the corporate court. Go to any government office where they're giving out what I call welfare. Meaning you go in, you punch a clock, you get a check, you get health care, you get bills, you get all these other different things to help your family out of poverty. And what the black man and woman has never gotten is our fair share of the taxes, the health, safety, and welfare. And so if we're going to address the laws, right, I had to give you the procedural mechanism by which it happened. I had to give you the background. And so we're talking about these youngsters with their guns in their hands. If we're not getting the same things that those white peasants, those white convicts got, then we're going to end up seeing a government that knows these things. One last thing. There was a study, I'm sure former Chief Murphy Paul and current Chief Deputy Paul, Myron knows about it. There was an R1 institution here by the LSU. They did a study with the district attorney's office, and they looked at homicide rates. And where there was blight, they found homicide. So the question then becomes, how do you address the blight? I was on a block in Baton Rouge the other day. There were literally 4 homes that some would consider blighted homes. The question is, why is there no governmental intervention?
That's right.
Why isn't anyone rehabilitating those homes, the eminent domain, then putting those homes back into the market, providing low subsidy loans for individuals, African Americans whose home ownership is already low? And so again, the question is, if there is blight in the community, when we know there's going to be homicide, what is the government going to do about it? Don't tell me fool myself about a bootstrap, and that's not what your people do. Don't tell me that. When you took our taxes that we pay every day and fed yourself and still feed them, and then everybody get on TV talking about solve the crime, we don't know what's going on. Man, I love them days. And I'm telling you, anybody in here who comes to court, I invite you to come and open to the club. They are some of the most respectful young men you will ever meet. They don't go from living in your houses. They don't go from yes men and no men to you. They don't go from loving you. They don't go from being your children to all of a sudden being evil and being murderers. It does not happen. Something is causing that. And this government has known since the African touchdown here on this soil what was going to happen. And if we're not addressing it, if we're not demanding the same thing that their peasants, that their communists got, then we're doing a disservice and we're misdiagnosing the problem. And what they call that in the health services is an iatrogenic effect. You don't give someone aspirin when they got cancer. And what we are seeing right now in our children is the effects of cancer of 400 plus years of oppression and poverty.
gonna go to Councilman Dunn first before I get to this side. I know Councilman Dunn has to lead to the bit. So I'm gonna ask him this question before let's leave. But Councilman Dunn, what's the profile of the shooter in Vegas? The person actually doing the shooting. What's that profile? And how does knowing that help us prevent crime?
I actually think that's a better question for Chief Paul and for Myron, even though Myron don't like data. I think, and I understand his perspective on it, I just truly do. I think society, media would like you to read this up.
So we have to do a better job, and we need to stop using that term as black men, labeling the youth as gangs, because we know they have a gang initiative. The federal community, they send money for gang initiatives. And that's what Baton Rouge is trying to do, and they're labeling these kids as gangs so they can receive that funding.
Thank God. And, but ladies, I know you have something to be brief, and I'm going to give a round 30 seconds to everybody to answer number 4.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm going to go back to what Brother Ryan said. When we talk about capital and what money in the house rooted, we put $200 million into funding juvenile jails that's only going to house 150 youth. $200 million. Now, they said the state's broke. They ain't got money for education. You can't pay teachers. So if you can't pay teachers, you can't go and recruit them. And if education's failing, what else are they going to turn to? Now, my brother, you hit on something big. $200 million. 200. That's your money that's being used against you to house your kids inside the failing systems that were created just to see them fall. Now, Chief, I'm coming to you right now. I'm sorry, I promise you to be brief. Every single time we come up with an initiative that works and shows how crime drops, you know I'm going with this, Chief. In 2020, was it 2022? 2021. We brought in community violence intervention. Every major stakeholder that did not look like us said, this is not going to work. Why are we wasting money with it? The federal government came in and said, we're going to pour millions of dollars back inside of black communities because we know police can't do it alone. What happened, Chief? What was the drop?
We had one of the highest reductions in homicides from 22 to 2023 compared to national average, or more than double the national average. We reduced homicides in the city of Baton Rouge. You didn't feel that. And most importantly, you didn't hear that. Those are facts.
Now, the reason why I brought that up, Chief, is because they gave us $5 billion. You dropped it by almost 50%. You got $200 million to build new jails rather than put preventive-based measures out there that's going to help kids. Dana, you're on the ground every day. It's working. Chad, I see you in the back, brother. You're on the ground every day. It's working. They know it's working, but they're not going to continue funding it. You know why? Because when it works, they don't have a job. And then you got to bring in initiatives that's going to continue to help us fail.
Right. All right. All right, so we're gonna start down here with Sister Gabby, and 30 seconds or less, preferably 15 seconds. Can y'all go ahead and pass it the mic? And we're going to go around. So, Brother Muhammad, you take it next. Lane's take it next. President Clanahan, you take it next. And Diari, I'll just take it 30 seconds or less, preferably 15 seconds. And to all the folks like Diari on the side, we'll take 10 seconds to 5 seconds to close. Before we get to that, you have a sheet that will show it on your chair. And we don't have one near you. You can sign in this sheet because we're going to have follow-ups to this. This just ain't a meeting. We're going to go out once a month in some community and do outreach, do activities at the park with the kids. So it's very important that we have your contact information so that we can reach you. If you would like to contribute to any of this work that we're going to be doing in the community, you can come see what the nation is doing with your money because you can volunteer help us. And we're buying the hot dogs and chips for kids. There's no beef hot dogs too, not pork. You can contribute to the effort by scanning the donate QR code next to it. So make sure y'all sign in if you want to donate. Make sure you see the QR code next to it. So I'm going to go ahead and start at this end here, and we're going to work our way around. And the fourth question is, and the fourth and final question, and then we're going to hear from y'all about that. What real steps can we take as a community to prevent violent crime and protect our neighborhoods?
Well, as a professional, I'm a teacher. And so one thing I've learned from teaching and just watching students in the environment, watching young people, is that if you don't give them anything to do, they're going to cause problems. And that's why there's a saying that I don't mind as a people's workshop. So we just need to give our young people something to do and to be productive. And it can't be easy either, because if it's too easy, then they're going to be productive. There's nothing else. So challenge them. We need to give our young people something to do.
I'm going to touch on the theme of love. Everybody, every church, every pastor, every police officer, every sheriff deputy needs to be on the theme that we have to love each other, because you don't shoot and you don't rob people that you love.
Thank you, brother. The ladies.
Pour more money into parenting. Everything we're talking about, the age of the profile of the kid, it always rooted in what's happening inside of the household. For a lot of people, you may think that a parent is someone who birthed the child, or a father. No, a lot of these, the youth that we're talking about, they live with their grandparents, they live with their aunts, they live with their uncles, they live with a friend that's sleeping on the couch. A lot of them are transient. Pour more money back into parenting so that they can get their hands wrapped around these youth so they don't have a reason to turn to the streets.
All right, President McClellan.
Okay, I think we need to know our neighbors. You know, we live in a society, we live next door to us. And don't respect the neighbor next door. You know, you see what everybody in that little 2 or 3 blocks knew everybody. As the brother said, if you did something wrong, everybody knew about it. We don't know nobody in the neighborhood, we don't want to know nobody. And there's no love in the neighborhood, so you have total chaos. You get back to the old way.
All right, Elder.
I'm an advocate for information. So we can't do better if we don't know better. And you know, like the song says, God's got the whole world in his hands. Believe it or not, you do too. So it's time that we unlearn and relearn and spread more information, because if there's anything you want to know, you can know it. So unlearn and relearn.
All right, Chief Paul.
All right, y'all can hear me, right?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to be quick on that. One of the challenges we have is, look, our youth has been miseducated, right? And we have to re-educate. You know, one of the challenges from a law enforcement perspective, when you ask me about gangs, and I've been chastised and talked to about saying that we had gangs in the city. Let me tell you one thing important. My father was at a community event. He said, I got a problem when you say gangs. I said, why? He said, because that group is a neighborhood group. And my son associated, my fear is when you call them gangs, that when you hand down some RICO indictment, that my baby, who I know is a good kid, on the right track, is going to somehow get tied into that. That's right. And I said, well, tell me what language works. He said, call them neighborhood groups. And so I know the art of communication, that if I lose that gang, then I'm never going to get the message across. So I began to say groups, and let's talk about this. But it's a challenge when they call themselves gangs. When they say things like gang gang, when they identify with tattoos and neighborhoods. But I do understand that. But it all goes down to that thing we talked about, that self-love. What frustrates me as a chief or as a law enforcement leader for 33 years is the lie that our babies have been believing. See this stop snitching? We should all have t-shirts that say stop snitching, just tell the truth. Because it is a lie that was made by criminals so they can continue to be criminals. If he and I were involved in criminal behavior and he get caught and tell me that's what rap used to be. Or in the gangs or the organized crime, sleeping with the fishes, how they used to address those issues. We got good kids believing a lie. We got good neighbors believing a lie. Look, I get the fear in the coming forward and saying things. That's why we have him. That's why we have her. Because we can't say that we don't have outlets to get that information. So here's a fact. When we look at homicide shootings in the city of Baton Rouge, and we start unpacking and investigating, you know what we learn? That in many of these shootings, the perpetrator or the suspect had knowledge that that shooting was going to occur. Somebody in their inner circle Who's the inner circle? Those are friends, those are relatives. Somebody knew. But there was a fear to pick up the phone and call law enforcement. And I get that. And I can give you example after example after example after example. And I also know that when we have people on the ground working, we have to support those systems so that when they're scared to call us, they can pick up the phone when two people are beefing. When we know that a situation is escalating. And we do that by deprogramming the lie that our kids and our neighbors were told. Good kids are supposed to tell. Good neighbors are supposed to tell. And we have too many outlets in this community right now. I don't care if it's domestic violence. You talk to the brother or somebody knew what that woman was going through. But nobody picked up the phone and said, hey, not just give her help, but give him some help too. Too many incidents. We gotta stop this lie called stop snitching in our community, y'all. It's killing us.
Thank you for finishing follow up. Terry Thompson. 30 seconds.
You know I love you. True. I love you to death. But I disagree with you.